A very good evening to all present here. Indian Steps and Business Incubators Association, ISBA, is proud to host the leadership series with the support from National Science and Technology Entrepreneurship Development Board, NSTDB, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, along with the support from Atal Innovation Mission. Today's uncertainty is putting new demands on businesses and their leaders, requiring new skills, perspectives, and mindsets. The leadership program provides an opportunity to the CEOs of the incubation centers and the co-founders of the startups, a thought-provoking and actionable strategies by the leaders and professionals from the industry. Today, we have with us the leaders of innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem of our country, representing government, industry, and investment agency. On behalf of the organizers, I take immense pleasure in welcoming Dr. Ashutosh Sharma, Secretary, Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. We are extremely honored to have Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, former Executive Director, Tata Sons, with us today to share his wisdom with us. Welcome you, sir. I take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Ramanan, Mission Director of Atal Innovation Mission, NITI Aayog, for joining us this evening. Mr. Naru Narayanan, an angel investor who had co-authored the book Wisdom for Startups from Grown-Ups, along with Mr. Gopalakrishnan, is also with us. Welcome you, sir. On behalf of ISBA, I welcome Dr. Anita Gupta, Advisor and Head, NSTDB, who always motivates and encourages us to organize such programs for the community. I welcome Ms. Poini Bhatt, CEO of Sign, and Ms. Ganga from Sign, who are the driving force behind this event, who had put a lot of efforts in organizing this program. I welcome all the participants representing incubation centers, startups, and other stakeholders of innovation and entrepreneurship community. With these few words, now I request Dr. Anita Gupta to share her thoughts on the support extended to incubation community by DST. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Suresh, and very good evening to one and all. Professor Ashutosh Sharma, who is championing the cause of science and technology and innovation sector across the country, industry veterans and champions, R. Gopalakrishnan, R. Narayanan, and our colleague from the NITI Aayog, Atal Innovation Mission, R. Ramanan. Incidentally, I see 3 R's in the speakers panelists today. So this is a very strange coincidence. My fellow colleagues from the incubator community, the champions of incubation industry. I think as I speak today, there has never been a better time where we could realize the way startups have come of age, and so is the case with the incubators. Exactly a year back when we coined and rolled out a Kavach program in a shortest span of time, and so was the case when we had no solutions to fight this health crisis of pandemic. We have seen so many solutions which have really been rolled out in a and the kind of the traction, the pace which has really materialized and fructified in a shortest span. This has all to be cherished and talked about. As we all know, Dr. R. Gopalakrishnan is the best author of many best-selling books. I think out of the Kavach program, we had one project which has come up, the ventilator project of Noka Robotics, which really showcased the sheer power of collaboration, the quality mentorship which came along, and this could really fast track the journey of the product, which otherwise could have taken 2-3 years to hit the light of the day or see the light of the day. And we have n number of stories to really talk about. I've been sharing the way Nidhi program, which we coined along with the Startup India program, has been churning out good success stories across, you name it, whether it's cyber security, to aerospace, to fintech, to edutech. So we have a lot to really feel proud of. But as we have a new call of being Atmanirbhar India, we have a lot to really achieve. But this pandemic, while it was challenging for all of us, it has really instilled a lot of confidence in the power of innovation, power of technology, and power of collaboration. And going forward, as coined by our secretary, we will be embarking on distributed model of incubators and on a hybrid model touching upon both and reaching out to both virtual as well as physical incubators wherever they are. So that's the next big thing as an offering from NSTDB in the next financial year. And we worked with AIM in fighting over this pandemic as a part of Government of India panel. And there are so many stories to talk about, but today's session happens to find a spotlight in the leadership series, which is third of its kind, jointly through NSTDB and WISBA. And it is going to be full of excitement, insights, and interesting. We are ready to unlearn and relearn. So the floor is all yours. I'll invite the champion from the government side, our secretary, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, to give his words of wisdom, followed by our industry champions through a panel session, which will follow. So thank you.
Thank you, Anita ji. I'm so happy to see that ISBA is organizing this event, which may be helpful for some of us. It would certainly be helpful for me to listen to these very deep minds with experience in the area in which we are discussing things. Mr. Gopal Krishnan, Mr. R. Naru Narayanan, and Mr. R. Ramnan, my colleague in a lot of things related to innovation, startups, and so on. And of course, Dr. Anita Gupta and everybody else who's there. I found the title of this event to be a little bit amusing. It says, Wisdom for Startups from Grown-Ups. Now, I certainly like to believe that there is a startup in all the grown-ups. At least it has to be there. A new start every day where appropriate, where opportunity is present, the opportunity to change. There is a thing about wisdom and there is a thing about grown-ups. So while grown-ups certainly bring in more experience on the table, they may not always necessarily bring the same amount of energy and aspiration. So a great mantra to succeed in everything is to have a good balance between the energy and experience. Now, certainly innovation is an idea whose time has come. It was not there 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I had to work very hard on my PhD students, even BTechs, for them to motivate to have a startup rather than look for a job. And there were not great deal of support available. There were no venture funds. There may be some, but they were certainly not reaching every nook and corner of the country. So now we live in great times. Indeed, everybody who's listening who is younger than me, it's a great time to roll up your sleeves and to take a plunge. Now, oftentimes, I've seen that people taking the plunge may not have very clear idea about what innovation is, what a startup is. So the easiest way I explain it to younger people, that invention is not to be confused with innovation. No matter how great an idea is, it is not innovation. It may be a great invention. So here is a black box called invention. In goes money and out comes ideas, knowledge, information, even wisdom or some aspect of it. But innovation is just the opposite. So in goes the knowledge, wisdom, information, data, measurements, and out comes money. So clearly there's a switching of roles of input and output in invention and innovation. It is invention and innovations working together, which makes for the sustainability of knowledge. So if we converted all our money into inventions, let's say typically in a university, then we would have nothing to feed the next generation, which means all this knowledge, some of this knowledge has to be converted back to socio-economic opportunities, and those opportunities are just knocking at our door. I wrote an article about 8 years ago on why I saw startups as something which brings together the universe of invention and innovation. So it is not like, okay, here's the academia, here's industry, invention, innovation, push of knowledge, pull of knowledge, no matter how you want to look at it. There's a lot of incompatibility between these two. So the nomenclature, the language, the lost in translation syndrome and all of that, the expectations and the worldview, they could be so incompatible. At least they were 10 years ago and earlier. So the way I looked at startups, that this is like mixing of oil and water. If you put a little bit of soap in there, then oil and water can mix. But otherwise, oil and water, they just don't mix at all, have a completely different nature. So it is basically startups, one can think in one limited way as the soap molecule, the back end of which is embedded in the knowledge ecosystem, the ideas, the information, the product development, invention, and the front end is embedded in the users of knowledge, the market, and so on. So here is this black box called startup, which somehow has to make compatible a great idea with its realization in the market. So of course that we have learned a lot of lessons in COVID-19, as was pointed out by Dr. Anita Gupta, and we put some of those lessons in place. In fact, last 5 years, DST has supported more incubators than in the previous 50. So that may be a good thing, it may not be a great thing. But in any case, it has picked up steam that there is a much greater appreciation for what incubators and startups can do for us. A third party analysis, I know Dr. Gupta is probably a little bit, shy of saying that. And I also don't totally believe it, but anyway, I'm going to say it, that a third party analysis of all these incubators that Dr. Anita Gupta worked so hard to put up in the last 5 years, they created new wealth of about 27,000 crore rupees. And they created directly new jobs of about 65,000 or so. So, okay, we may reduce it a little bit. We may, worry about where these numbers are coming from and so on. But the whole point is that this movement has to really pick up steam now. It certainly is looking very good. So now ideas to market, when you think about it, it's about knowing your market. It's about knowing your customer. So while we start with a great idea, that idea has to transform along the way into a market opportunity. And this is where whole lot of things, whole lot of action happens over there. For example, transition to market. Well, oftentimes towards the middle or the end, one start thinking, hey, idea is so great, but maybe I've not done as much work on its market space. And we may even need different kind of people to be able to do that. Another incompatibility I've seen often come in. So here is an ideas man and here's a market man. Now they also have to develop a culture, an interface, which makes them work together. Also, the first set of people who have ideas and they take it forward, a little bit wary of, a little bit afraid of losing control. So it is also about diversity. It's about learning diversity. It's about working with diversity. It's about working with people who are unlike myself, which is the hardest thing about to do in this world. Second thing, when I mentored a few startups, and some of them have been very successful, and this was very interesting because 10 years ago, in a city like Kanpur, nobody was thinking about, can we have a cutting edge technology like nanotechnology based startup, which is based on hardware, not software, not apps, not process, but product. Right? It was a big challenge. But indeed, what I found, the first thing actually I told the student, look, you don't sell a product. You don't sell a process. You don't sell a technology. What you in fact aim to sell is the knowledge, information. And because you are a PhD in that area, or whoever you are, you should know better than the rest of the world about what this product actually signifies to the customer. So customer, we import a lot of machines, we do a whole lot of these things, but nobody has any clue about how to effectively use it. So it is not about selling just, a product which everybody else can also make and sell, but you provide a solution to the problem of the customer. And if you do that, then you have no competition at all. So I think this is one of the things that we could focus on is to be in the knowledge business. So it is to know who your customer is, what are the demands of that customer, And it is not about supplying a machine. Of course, you supply a machine, you supply a product, you supply all of that, but you solve a problem for the customer. You optimize your solutions to that particular business. And I think I have personally seen that this really sells, because most people are just interested in fly-by-night operations, and they would just sell something, leave it there, and then you grapple with it and you are now satisfied and meet your targets. Of course, now there's a lot of talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, and it provides a lot of new opportunities to startups, to all the policies which are coming in, to see that there is a market there and that there is a preferential access to that market. Um, to give you an idea, just an example, just few weeks ago, we did liberalization and democratization of geospatial data. Now, for example, in 250 years history of mapping in India done by Survey of India, also requires approvals from defense, from home, everything. It turns out that you needed about 6 to 8 months of approvals if you wanted to map anything, including your own property, for example. So clearly that's not tenable with the accuracy, the scale, accuracy, and the speed which is required today. So what you need basically is liberalization, which means that no approvals needed, self-certification is good. We already have plethora of laws. Anybody breaking any law, or even without it, no, I won't say that, can be put in jail. Okay, so enough of that. Any little guy out there in the street can catch anybody and put him in the jail. We don't need more of that. What we need is ease of doing business. And the second aspect is democratization of data, indeed of all the processes. What does it mean? It means all the data which is sitting in our lockers, key forgotten somewhere, that ought to be anything which has been produced by support from the government, ought to be available to all our private sector, to our citizens, to our gram panchayats, to all of that. Now, the reason I'm saying this is going to build a lot of startups. For example, the opportunities that it provides is just this one sector, because once you have digital geospatial data, that's really needed for every kind of planning, every kind of decision making, every kind of governance, development, and you basically, build on this data, manipulate data, build applications, fly drones, get LiDAR, do great business. And now there's a level playing field for doing that. Just the business of mapping itself is worth about rupees 1 lakh crores going 7 years in the future. Today is about worth 20,000 crores annually. So all the startups have to play a great role in this. They have to dip into all this mine of data. I don't think that really big companies are up to it to do that. So that we have to be really energetic and knowing exactly what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Great opportunity. DRDO, for example, is offering a lot of space for startups to solve their problems. Atal Innovation Mission has done great things in last 5 years, 5 years that I have been engaged with it, has done fantastic work. ISRO, as we know, has opened the whole lot of market related to, satellite images and so on. So I think we are going to be looking increasingly at a future which has to be built brick by startups. Absolutely, I have no doubt in my mind that it is startups who are going to be looking at this future squarely and building upon it. Of course, some early directions to startups are very important, and this is where their engagement with industry, established industry, as well as mentorship comes into a great play. So Atal Innovation Mission, I know, for example, has been working very hard on creating an army of mentors. To my mind, that is the single most important thing there is, because people don't lack ideas. What they lack is the appropriate information and confidence that they can actually do it. Every time that I've tried to convince a person to have a startup, what I found is he or she is not lacking ideas and they would succeed. What they are lacking is the information and confidence. Most important thing, because there's nothing in our education that prepares us for innovation. It prepares us for invention, totally. It prepares us, well, some way for invention, but it certainly does not touch at all on the processes of innovation and whether we have the confidence actually to get in there. I would just conclude very quickly by saying that there are other things that DST has been doing. One of them is called Sati centers. And this is solution to which problem? Well, we know that MSMEs and startups don't have very easy access to high-end scientific infrastructure, whether it is for testing, it is for rapid prototyping, for doing all of that. So access to our informational resources and our infrastructural resources, which are also a little bit locked up, in all universities, IITs, and so on. There is tens of thousands crores worth of infrastructure which is created by the government every year. We need to have an ease of access, transparent access to all of these resources. Sati is one such initiative in that direction. It is setting up Section 8 companies, 3 of them every year. And these are basically at an investment of 125 crores each. It'll have rapid prototyping. It would have, these small manufacturing things, fabrication, but also, testing standards and so on. And 80% of the time on these machines is kept aside for MSMEs and startups at a very transparent pricing, which is should be only sufficient to run that center, but not for making profit there. So every year, 3 such new centers until we have 20 centers across the country, so that one is never very far from one of these centers, which provides both informational and infrastructure support in order for people to walk in and get something fabricated as a prototype, for example. Finally, what is it? Some of the things that come to my mind looking at the future or near future, immediate future, what did we need to do? Now that we have had this model of incubators and startups, we also need to now think about how do we 10x this number of startups which are being serviced by these incubators. Now, obviously, this calls for a new model. It calls for some kind of distributed startups, which means make use of your own space, physical space for a startup, but all the other services, whether it is networking, informational resources, access to some infrastructure, mentorship, and so on, that ought to be provided by a nearby incubator. So if we were to have some kind of associate membership of these incubators, then we are able to scale up, the movement that we have going there, because having 20, 30 startups in an incubator is a good start, but it didn't go sufficiently far in making our numbers jump from 15,000 startups to 150,000 startups in next 5 years. Second thing, of course, that most of our incubators are not theme-based because there were not sufficient demand for a single theme in a single place. But all that is changing. There is a great deal of benefits in having a theme-based incubator, whether it is water, energy, what have you, health, because all those resources which are needed could be concentrated in one place. And any big city today is ready for theme-based incubators that we need to look at. Finally, about how do we promote inclusion, equity, and diversity. Gender is the biggest part of it. And of course, when I talk to women entrepreneurs, incubatees, startup people, they have some set of problems which are a little bit different in nature than the general, like male, incubatees. Can we address these problems very specifically? These are problems, for example, of networking, of having access to many things without, having harsh traveling conditions and so on, a whole lot of that. So can we make actually a very clear list of what is the extra stuff that we need to provide to women incubators for them to be equally successful, for them to have a level playing field? Partly solution may be having women-centric incubators, but that's not the only solution and not really the exclusive solution that I believe in. But in any case, all angles have to be examined. And finally, we have a new policy on science, technology, and innovation 2021 coming up very quickly now, maybe next couple of months. And it provides, it focuses very strongly on the structure, architecture, and processes of innovation and startups. So in case some of you who have interest in it would want to provide feedback on it, there was a draft which was put up for consultation, for public consultation on this policy. Any aspect that you may find interesting or incomplete, please, you can send us an email. It's still not too late. If it's a compelling idea, we would certainly try to factor that in our policy. It has undergone consultation. There are over 1 lakh ideas that have been received already on this. So many of them repeat over, but here we have a very specific community that is discussing all of these ideas. So maybe there is something very important, very compelling, which has been left out. Please absolutely feel free to send us an email on that. Thank you very much for having this event. And I wish everybody all the best in being innovative, in being creative, in having your incubation and having a great startup, a unicorn or whatever it is called, doesn't really matter. It's, by any name, it's a good name. So all the best to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your wisdom and giving some insights on innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, the opportunity that is in front of these startups in the area of defense, and also the role that incubation centers should play by experimenting new models like distributed network model and reaching out to SATI centers and reaching out to the more startups. We assure you from ISBA that collectively we will be reaching out to our community, and we will increase the number of startup supports in coming years. Thank you, sir. Now it gives me immense pleasure to introduce Mr. Ramanan, the Mission Director of the Atal Innovation Mission at NITI Aayog, a flagship national innovation and entrepreneurship initiative launched by the Government of India. As the Mission Director of Atal Innovation Mission, Mr. Ramanan has been instrumental in the launch and execution of several nationwide innovation and entrepreneurship initiatives that results in establishing 10,000 plus Atal Tinkering Labs across the country in schools, 100 plus Atal Incubation Centers and Atal Community Innovation Centers, organized 24 Atal New India Challenges and 15 ARISE Challenges to stimulate product innovations with Ministries of India. As Secretary mentioned, he has been instrumental in establishing the largest mentors of change networks with over 10,000 plus registration nationwide. Mr. Ramanan was previously Managing Director and CEO of CMC Limited, a subsidiary of the globally acclaimed Tata Consultancy Services. Ramanan joined TCS in 1981 after graduating from IIT Mumbai in electrical engineering and played an instrumental role in the growth of TCS, ranging from product development, technical marketing, global business development, and general management of large centers of TCS. Mr. Ramanan is a Harvard Business School alumni, and he has been accredited in sustainability leadership by Cambridge University and has an honorary doctorate awarded by Gujarat Law Society. Mr. Ramanan was awarded the 2019 National Digital List of the Year by SAPNIT and the 2020 Outstanding National Public Service Award by Confederation of Micro, Small and Medium Service Enterprises. Mr. Ramanan received Most Valuable CEO Awards from Business World India twice in a row, received Asia Outstanding CEO Award from CMO Asia, Singapore, and also received Rajiv Gandhi Shiromani and Indira Gandhi Shanbhavani Awards. Mr. Ramanan is lifetime chair of Harvard Business School, and he is on the boards of the Defense Innovation Organization of India. He is also the chair of New Zealand Trade Enterprises PSHETS, the Indo-US Technology and Trade Forum, CSIR committees, and as member of Tata Group Innovation Forum. It's a pleasure to have you with us, sir, today evening, and we request you to moderate the fireside chat on wisdom for startups from grown-ups. Over to you.
Thank you, Suresh Kumarji, for that very generous introduction. And first and foremost, it is indeed a pleasure and a privilege for me to be part of this very, very exciting conversations that we are going to have with two people for whom I have the greatest of admiration, and particularly Mr. Gopal Krishnan, who has also been personally a mentor for me. But before I come to that, I also want to thank Dr. Ashutosh Sharma for his wonderful introduction and for laying out the landscape of the startup world that we are all in today. India is indeed on the cusp of becoming one of the fastest growing startup nations of the world. As we are all aware, this has been also a focus by the Honorable Prime Minister in his clarion call for Atmanirbhar Bharat. And there have been many, many initiatives in India that has been sponsored by the Government of India, including from DST, DBT, Startup India, Invest India, and Atal Innovation Mission, to see how we can become a nation of job creators, not just job seekers. And in the light of the fact that we have more than 50,000 plus startups today in India, according to some of the latest numbers, we have more than 34 unicorns, out of which 11 unicorns were born during the year of the COVID-19 crisis. And we have more than 300 to 350 incubators in our country. The book that has been written by Mr. Gopal Krishnan and Mr. Narayanan is most appropriate for the times. And the book is on wisdom for startups from grown-ups, discovering corporate Ayurveda. I have gone through the entire book, and I have to tell all the people who are listening onto this call, this is one of the most readable books that I have recently read. It is, you can't keep it down. It reads like a story, but it is full of packed with anecdotes and examples, which would be invaluable for any startup or for any person who wants to enter into the entrepreneurial world. Not only that, it is a great learning for many corporates too. So with that, let me first have the honor of introducing two people who don't need much of an introduction, of course, but it is my duty to read out their profile. Mr. R. Gopal Krishnan is an author, speaker, and corporate advisor with three parts to his career of over 50 years. The first 31 years at the Hindustan Lever, where he was the vice chairman. The second stint of 17 years as a director in Tata Sons, and the third since 2016 as a prolific author and corporate advisor. Currently, he is the non-executive chairman of Castrol India and is the independent director of Hamas Holdings, Sri Lanka. He is also distinguished professor at IIT Kharagpur and executive in residence at Mumbai's prestigious SP Jain Institute of Management and Research. He has so far authored over 16 books since 2007, and many of them are books which you are all familiar with: The Case of the Bonsai Manager, When the Penny Drops, A Biography of Innovations and Crash, Lessons from the Entry and Exit of CEOs, and so on. All of them extraordinarily informative, extraordinarily enlightening books, and a must-read for most of us. Gopal always welcomes comments on his speeches, his talks, his writings, his books. To me, Mr. Gopal, I met him in 1993 first as a young yuppie from TCS, and he was in Bangalore and he was at Unilever. And at that time, I remember on the very first day that I met him, and I don't know whether he remembers it or not, he took me to his house in Bangalore. And that for me was a great revelation of how a leader of his caliber could entertain an interaction with a yuppie like me. And then from then on, I was his fan. Of course, throughout my stint at TCS subsequent to that, and as a MD and CEO of CMC, and subsequently as a part of the Tata Group Innovation Forum, Mr. Gopal has been a mentor, a friend, a guide to me. And I would attribute a whole lot of things that I'm doing today to him. He has also been fortunately on the as a very, very close friend and colleague and guide for me in my stint at Atal Innovation Mission, as he's also a member along with Dr. Ashutosh Sharma as the Mission High-Level Committee board to which the Atal Innovation Mission reports. So it's been wonderful to have him as a mentor, and we're going to hear a lot more from him over the next few minutes. Mr. Narayanan is He began his career in Coca-Cola and Nestle, followed by extensive experience in advertising in a corporate career. But however, since the 1980s, when India was still not very much advanced in the startup world, Mr. Narayanan has got deeply involved with startups. He founded and ran a company to make and market Big Fun, a chewing gum product. His next venture was to create a machine or business system to dispense dosa, and you all are familiar with Dosa King. Just like hamburgers, an offering that he branded as Dosa King, which became very, very popular and is still very well known throughout the industry. He has then become a passionate participant in angel investing and mentoring. So let me welcome you both, Mr. Gopal Krishnan and Mr. Narayanan, for this very exciting conversation. And I'm sure we have already more than 179 participants plus people on YouTube and Facebook live on this session. And I'm sure they're all looking forward to this discussion. I would like to start off, Mr. Gopal Krishnan and Mr. Narayanan, with a question. Both of you are from different backgrounds. You, Gopal, have been in the corporate sector throughout or most of the time. Naru, you have plunged into the world of startups at a very early stage, and both of you have played leadership roles in your respective professional journey. Can you now, because we are living in a world of startups and we are also seeing an increasing awareness, as was pointed out in the book, and I think that is very relevant, the Y2K movement was an eye-opener for international organizations on Indian IT capability. Similarly, the COVID-19 crisis has been sort of an eye-opener of the power of startups to the corporate world because of the number of innovations that have come up from the startup world and the need for startups to create more innovations in a post-COVID-19 world. Could you share your thoughts about the leadership quality that you should have as an entrepreneur? We can start off with Gopal Krishnan and then Mr. Narayanan, your thoughts on this, because this is so very important if you really want to acquire leadership for your startup or for your company that you are engaged with.
Thank you, Ramanan. You've been very kind to give us such a generous introduction. But your question that you raised is to throw some light on the leadership qualities required in a corporate career or in a startup.
Right.
And without getting too pedantic or long-winded about it, I would say that the leadership quality, in essence, is exactly the same, whether you're in the IAS or in Atal Innovation Mission or in a startup or in a Tata, which is to lead other people. And you can write books on what it means to lead other people. You have to inspire people. You must bring out the best in them. And you must be empathetic to people. All that stuff can be stated and is not necessary for me to state. But the essence of leadership is creating a band of people who want to follow you, not because they have to follow you. And I don't see that it's different, whether you're the chairman of Tata Sons or the managing director of TCS or a startup entrepreneur. So to that extent, I would say there's a commonality. Obviously, there are differences and they are self-evident and I don't have to repeat it. But maybe I should stop there and say, if there is to be a lesson on leadership, I would think that they would be having several features of commonality.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And Mr. Narayanan, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would. Firstly, thank you very much for this opportunity and for your kind words. I don't disagree with Gopal, but I would like to add that fundamentally, an entrepreneur he works in an environment of centralized management. And he needs to be an all-rounder. He doesn't have a large organization with him. And therefore, he needs to know a little bit of finance and accounting. He needs to know a little bit about marketing, a little bit about the technicalities, etc. He's one man answering for what is several in a corporate setup. All this translates into his leadership in one fundamental way: speed of decision making. And he's eminently equipped to do that, providing he has a smattering of all the functional area, knowledge of the functional areas. So I think to that extent, it might be somewhat different between a corporate and a startup. Although I'm fully aware of several dignitaries who have been very, very knowledgeable on the functional areas as well. For instance, you take my brother Gopalakrishnan, 31 years in levers, he can't help but have a fair degree of knowledge of manufacturing and marketing and finance, etc. So, but a startup is at a formative stages by definition, and that organization hasn't grown. So the CEO needs to be a bit of an all-rounder. That's a fundamental difference.
Wonderful. So indeed, that is so very important for all the startups here, because very often and sir, I can relate it slightly to my own experience. I was working for a large corporate like TCS and CMC. But when I came to Atal Innovation Mission, it was almost like it was an entrepreneurial organization. It was a fairly new organization with only 3 or 4 people around. So you have to do a lot of things that you would otherwise expect in a corporate world to be well laid out and so on and so forth. Now, that leads us to the next question, and I'd like to pose this to Gopalji. So we talk of innovation, we talk of entrepreneurship, but you need to have a certain mindset in order to succeed as an entrepreneur. And this entrepreneurial mindset, today we have a lot of people who follow Steve Jobs or Elon Musk as a potential role model, or a Mark Zuckerberg, because they have or Steve. I know these people have arrived at fame and success in their startup ventures. But what sort of mindset should one have? Are these are these the ideal type of people whom one should emulate? That is one part. And second is, what is the type of mindset that you should have in order to launch yourself on an entrepreneurial journey and become successful?
Anybody to stand up and say that Elon Musk or Steve Jobs don't have a right mindset worthy of emulation must be off his rocker. I mean, these are exceptionally bright people who have delivered enormous economic value to the world at large and solving consumer problems. I think when you're an entrepreneur, then there will be some obvious areas of great admiration and worth emulating. For example, the kind of critical thinking that an Elon Musk or Steve Jobs would have displayed, and those are all captured in various books about them and their ventures. The type of innovativeness that they have brought to bear, challenging the unchallengeable, those are all definitely worth emulating. But there may be other aspects, because there's no perfect human being, there's no perfect managing director, there's no perfect chairman, there is no perfect prime minister, there is no perfect anybody. There will be other aspects of it where you should not emulate. And one of the things that happens in India, we tend to have a profile of entrepreneurs who are much younger than their counterparts in the United States. Typically in the United States, at least from the data that I have seen, people become entrepreneurs in their mid-30s. They work the first 7-10 years somewhere else, and then bug got them. A bit like Naru has done, he became an entrepreneur only at the age of 35 or 40. There you tend to be a bit mature because you have walked the path, your shoes are a bit worn out, and khiladi ne kuch sikha hai. In India, many people try to become entrepreneurs right after IIT or IIM, or when they are just 22 or 23. There's nothing wrong with it. They are very clever and creative, but they tend to then get swayed. There's a possibility that they get swayed. I'm not saying it will happen, with the style and the manner of the Elon Musks and the Steve Jobs. Now, to those people, I would say, be careful. Like a swan separates the water from the milk. Don't emulate their habits. Some of them may be actually not very good habits in leadership terms. And carry with you a sense of humility, because they might have achieved so much that they can afford to be a bit head in the air. You have to keep your feet on the ground and your head in the air. So don't let go. So humility is something that is not normally advised to young people, but I would add that, by the way, not only for entrepreneurs, but even for managers. You come out of an IIM thinking that you learned everything there is to know about management. You join the IAS and you think you become, the next best thing to this country. All of them have, and their seniors will always tell them, be humble. And that's something I thought is worth elucidating on this occasion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And I think that is very important, because as startups start acquiring success, this fact about humility and willingness to keep learning along the way is so very important if you want to gain further success and if you really want to make an impact. And that leads me to the next question to Mr. Naru. Naru, you have beautifully covered 9 stories, startup stories in your book, The Wisdom for Startups from Grown-ups. What led you to select those 9 stories? I mean, we are, like I said, we are 50,000 startups today in our country. But there must have been something that you have seen in these 9 stories that are worth sharing. And also, what has been your most favorite experience in your startup and maybe a most instructive experience in your startup? Can you throw some light on that?
So I would say that I don't want to give you some fundas about how I very intelligently and scientifically selected these 15 startups whom I approached incidentally,
Okay.
and got to write about 9. I think there was a little bit of resistance also from the some of the startups because they didn't feel that they were ready to go out there and embrace publicity in this fashion. And you do understand that the publicity that comes from a book like this is somewhat much more long-lasting than a publicity in a newspaper publication. So, but I did try to segregate the startups into those who were pre-dot-com bust and post-dot-com bust, number one. Now, because I wanted to establish, you see that tagline of discovering corporate Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a way of life and long life at that. And the idea that Gopal and I both toyed around with and we felt very strongly about is that a startup should seek to create a long-lasting organization. By taking 4 out of those 9 startups from a pre-dot-com bust period, they're still alive, all of them, and flourishing. We can see that it's not anathema to startups to have a fairly long-lasting life. Those startups are, some of them are as old as 30, 35 years. And it speaks well of the Indian startup ecosystem that we have been able to nurture startups which continue to have acceptance. But they belong to a different phase. And the current startups belong to a different phase. So those guys will have to adapt themselves further to continue their coexistence. So overall, I was just trying to get a good cross-section across a time period of 40 years. With regard to favorite experience, and that's a bit of a tricky one, so I'll just quickly give you an example. I started manufacturing bubblegum and chewing gum when I became an entrepreneur. And sure enough, despite my best attempts, we ran into problems. And I opened the newspaper one day in 1988, and I find that ICICI is starting up a venture capital firm called TDICI. And I got a friend of mine to provide me an introduction. I spoke to the chief executive there, and he says to me, hey, look, this is for technology that we are doing this. And I had anticipated that reaction, and I had an answer for him, which was that, hey, what I'm doing is technology. And he said, in what manner is it technology? And I said, we are going to go into pharma gums, pharmaceutical gums. And he said, what are the applications of the bubble gum, chewing gum, and pharmaceutical gums? And I said, sustained release of medication, because you eat a Strepsil, in 30 seconds, the Strepsil has vanished. Whatever medication is to be delivered is delivered in 30 seconds. You put a same medication into a chewing gum, it lasts for 45 minutes, and it's sustained over a 45-minute period. Much later, the chief executive met me one day and he said, I got to tell you, I admire the reaction you gave me. we were in the technology business. We knew we were getting into chewing gum. We didn't think of you as a technology company, but we liked your answers. So, does that answer your question that you asked me?
Yeah, yes, yes. And you know, in some of the stories that you have pointed out, and I was going through them, you have always brought out, you know, some of the challenges that they have had. Almost all the startups have had challenges during their span and during their life cycle. But some of them were not able to, you know, not in these stories, but most of the startups, many of them they give in. And there was something that was different about these startups which enable them to survive and to thrive. Are there one or two characteristics that you can share with the startup world that, you know, when you're down and when the chips are down and when you feel very challenged, what is the reservoir of strength that you draw upon, and how do you go through that?
So this varies from startup to startup. I don't think that there is any single magic formula that I have, but in the one example I could really give is Snapdeal and the kind of agony that the entrepreneur must have gone through. And he came out and he continues, I can't say flourish, but he's there. And so long he's standing, he's still going to become a formidable foe for the rest of the industry sooner or later. The second example I can give you is when SIFI purchased India World for 500 crores. It told what in tennis you would call an unforced error, perhaps. They were doing fine, and then the investment banker tells them that, look, the market is responding better to ISPs which have a consumer touch. And he was referring obviously to Yahoo then. And overnight, literally, so to speak, in a very short period of time, the entrepreneur Ramraj went on to make a purchase which hit the headlines because it was absolutely unheard of for a startup to be valued at 500 crores in those days. And the stock price of SIFI flourished as a result of that. So I would just give those two as examples.
Great example, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Indeed, you know, there are some often unforced errors that enter into a startup's life cycle, but how you deal with them on a case-by-case basis and how do you surmount them is indeed something that you'll be able to glean from this particular book through the examples given. Gopalji, I turn over to you. You have always drawn great analogies when it comes to innovation and entrepreneurship. And in one case, you have referred to the design principles of the human system and compared it to startups. Could you elaborate a little more on that? And what is the connection that you see or the analogy between the human design system and that of startups? And what can one learn from that and apply it in a startup's life cycle?
Thank you for that question. Yes, you're quite right. I am very struck by the fact that we tend to use physics metaphors when we talk of innovation, you know, stage gate method, sorting out the essentials from the non-essentials, decision matrices, etc., etc. But through my experience, and when you were a very valued colleague, when we both worked together in the Tata Group Innovation Forum, one of the things, I had an opportunity at that time, as you know, to visit top companies globally, you know, DuPont, Dow, many companies, GE, and many universities. I went to Cambridge, I went to London Business School, I went to MIT. And through all that, it just struck me, and it struck me, I'm not saying I thought of an innovative idea, that the biology metaphor is far more relevant to innovation and entrepreneurship than the physics metaphor. Many women produce babies. Many female of the animal species produce babies. They may not understand the science of it, but through experience and handover from generation to generation, they've all acquired some expertise through the process. And innovation and entrepreneurship is a bit carrying the biological metaphor. So once my mind was turned into that, I started, and I wrote a book called A Biography of Innovations rather than a History of Innovation, in which I covered many examples to illustrate this point, that the biological metaphor. So you can see now where the connection between the human body and the innovation and by the way, I regard innovation and entrepreneurship, they are not identical, but for the purpose of this discussion, I'm keeping them as two sides of the same coin. All entrepreneurs are not innovative. Neither are all innovators entrepreneurs, as Asutosh ji said in his opening remarks. But I'm, for the purpose of this discussion, treating them as two sides of the same coin.
Actually, you have elaborated that in your book also, sir. The difference between an innovator and an entrepreneur.
And you asked the question, how did you think of this human design principle? Now, you know, we all have bodies, and we generally believe that if you're close to a subject for a long time, you know a lot about that subject. So I will come and tell you, you know, I've been in the consumer goods industry for 35 years. So you say, wow, he must be an expert. But you're very close to your body, but you don't know the design principle of your body. Because the guy who designed and architected your body doesn't talk to you. And I found a very interesting reference to this, where a person with a doctorate, with a master's degree in human anatomy had become a management consultant. You know, if you can mix up disciplines, very interesting outcomes. And it is to him that I owe this idea. He said, if you see the design principle of a human body, of which you're the beneficiary but not the architect, and understand, he said the first principle is redundancy, which means have a fallback plan. I'm giving you the human body and the entrepreneur's equivalent. Never assume that this route is going to work. So it's called redundancy. The second one about the human design, body design, is diversity. The entrepreneurial equivalent is features for uncertainty. So if you look at your immune system, there are 3 layers of the immune system. If the first one fails, the second one will come. The second one fails, the third one will come. If all 3 fail, then only you get COVID-19. Right? Any immunologist can tell you this. The third thing about the human design system is modularity, which you have short-term mechanisms. You suddenly get a fever, right? And that tells you something is wrong. You suddenly have diarrhea, and that tells you something is wrong. And the equivalent of that is short notice mechanisms. The fire alarm goes off, quality complaints increase. Then you have to do something about it. The fourth one is adaptation. You know, the human body doesn't always look for a combat. If there is a threat, it will see how to adapt. Many startups and people in business think they're always there for combat. There's a certain, what I call male chauvinist idea, I'll kill the competition, especially as you grow bigger. But the human body is one of adaptation. And the next one is prudence. The body is prudent. It doesn't take big chances. And I think entrepreneurs should also be that way. They should be not be impulsive. They should be playing safe. Despite all the books that write about great visionary entrepreneurs, once in a while, all these rules will be broken. And the last one is a human body is very holistic. A pain in the foot may result in a clot in the brain, you know, and acupuncture works on that principle that the whole body is connected. So I think these 6 items, redundancy, diversity, modularity, adaptation, prudence, and holistic, are principles taken from the design of the human body, which I find brilliantly applied to entrepreneurs.
Fascinating, sir. Fascinating. In fact, I think this is absolutely of great importance to every startup. How do you build the redundancy? How do you bring diversity? How do you ensure modularity? How do you make sure that you adapt rather than always think of competing? How are you prudent? How do you have a holistic approach? All of this become, the armors with which a startup can learn to grow. And just a follow-up question to that, sir, to you. The word incubator is also, by definition, a bio term.
Correct.
The mother incubating the womb, the child being incubated in the womb, and so also we have today more than 400 incubators in our country who are trying to enable our startups to succeed. So can you extend your analogy to the role of an incubator and the CEO of an incubator? Because you have a number of CEOs of incubators who are there, not only the startups who are leading startups. So what would you say to them?
So my view on this, and this is open to a difference of opinion, but I have to give you my view. I think an incubator is exactly what the name suggests.
Yeah.
It is like a maternity home.
Hmm.
Now, just like our brain has got number of neurons which are fighting with each other, and once in a while gives a flash,
Hmm.
and that gives you a concept in the brain. A concept in the brain is like a fetus in the womb. Now, you don't celebrate a fetus in the womb until it becomes a baby.
Correct.
Until you can see its articulation of features, you know. In the same way, a concept in the brain is not equal to an innovative idea. People start celebrating that, oh, that is my idea. He has stolen my idea.
Hmm.
The idea is worth nothing
Hmm.
until it becomes a concept. And a concept is an articulation. It is the equivalent of a mother delivering a baby in the maternity home. Now you can see the features of the child. For example, who got the idea of heavier than air traveling objects,
Hmm.
flying objects? It was Valmiki.
Hmm.
Because in the Ramayana, he has written with great poetic Sanskrit about the Pushpaka Vimana.
Hmm.
That's a heavier than air flying object.
Hmm.
But he could never convert it into a prototype.
Right.
In fact, for the next 3,000 years, nobody could convert it until Wilbur and the Wright brothers did it.
Right.
So it can take a long time between idea and the brain. And so an incubator must be very conscious of this, that his main task is to help that idea in the head to be articulated as a prototype and not create other visions or other confusions. And I think incubators have specialist skills. They must develop specialist skills. And I believe that they are playing a very, very valuable role, just like a gynac is advising your daughter or your daughter-in-law to have a healthy baby.
Right.
And if incubators can reduce child mortality, idea mortality, I think they're doing a great job. They have a huge role to play.
Indeed, indeed. And that's something that we at Atal Innovation Mission have been advocating to the incubators, that how do you ensure that we increase the success rate of startups who can graduate from your incubator. We are not even talking about them becoming successful unicorns, anything like that, but they should successfully graduate, be able to stand on their own legs and be investable, become investable. So that's the point of departure, where they're able to stand on their own legs and depend on the outside world. And that's, the incubators need to bring that success rate up. And we are advocating that if you are able to bring it up to 60 to 70%, that would be a great service to the entire startup community. So let me pose this question to both, and we will start off with Naruji. We startups go through these valleys of death, as they call, and of course, these valleys of death are due to various problems: mentoring support, venture capital support, lack of technology or research access, and so on and so forth. But one important valley of death is during the scaling period, in the scaling up. This period becomes one of the idea is proven, the prototype is working, everything seems to be going good. And then when it comes to the scale up, it doesn't happen. Why does it not happen? And what are and in your book, you touch on quite a few examples related to that. That there have been examples of apparently, startups with the potential, but they have not been able to fulfill that potential. So what would be your thoughts on that, sir?
So I would put it in a slightly more positive fashion. And that is, I would say the startup lacks the experience. Till yesterday, he was focused on getting his prototype up and running. He's got the prototype up and running, and suddenly funds, which was till yesterday, he was operating under conditions of impoverishment. And today, funds seem to be somewhat abundantly available. He doesn't have an organization to back it up. Now, what happens in a startup, I mentioned this earlier, is that he operates in a centralized management system where he's the all-rounder. And notionally, he's assigning probability. And I'm sorry to go into statistics, but he's simultaneously dealing from one problem at a time. He's dealing with 5 problems at a time. And each of them has an 80% chance of success. But if one is conditional to the first one, is conditional to the second, is conditional to the third and a fourth, then it's 0.8 multiplied by 0.8 multiplied by 0.8 and multiplied by 0.8. And he drops below the 50% level, chances of success. And that is what I think hits the inability. I've quantified something, but the inability to know where the next bullet is going to come from, might come from, and to plan for it is what hits you during the scaling up period.
Excellent. Gopalji, taking, I would like your views, particularly, in the book you talk about the importance of planning, execute. I saw that particular phrase in that, and I think this is very much relevant to that. What is it that startups can do to overcome this particular valley of death? And is there anything from the grown-up world that you can relate to that can help them during this period?
So I feel quite passionately to the answer that I'm about to give you. If I take the biological metaphor further on, scaling up is like adolescence. If prototyping is like infancy, and creating multiple testing prototypes to find out the right one which works in the market is the equivalent of childhood, then scaling up is the equivalent of adolescence. Now, anybody who's raised a son or a daughter, and that certainly includes myself and yourself, knows that the challenges of adolescence are vastly different from infancy.
Right.
In infancy, they will listen to you. In adolescence, they will not listen to you. In adulthood, it's further different. So the first principle that entrepreneurs should get into their mind is that when they come to scaling up, the skills and the mindsets required are very different. Just like if you don't want your son or daughter to be a psychological wreck, you cannot treat them like an infant when they are 16 or 17. Now, what is involved in scaling up? And I think this is very important because large companies do it and people say, oh, it's easy for Tatas or Levers to do it. TCS itself, where you have worked, is a terrific example of an execution machine that the same people may not be able to reinvent. Right. It's developed over 35 years, 40 years from Mr. Kohli's time. And if you take apart, and you can confirm whether I state something which is factual, they thought big. As early as 1970s, Mr. Kohli was saying, let there be Tata, Unisys and Burroughs, let there also be TCS, let them compete. So they thought very big that we can be global, even though the pattern or the picture in Mr. Kohli's mind may not have been that clear. Back in the 70s and 80s, the economic environment was also very different. So thought big, but they started small. And I'm sure Mr. Kohli must have pulled you up sometimes for eating a meal which is more expensive than you needed for your nutritional value. He was a great advocate of frugality, saying, be careful be careful how you spend your money. And so he thought big, but he started small and make mistakes. And you have been a part of that journey. It's not good for me to lecture to you, but I think I would like our audience to know that TCS also made mistakes like anybody else. And once you've thought big, started small, corrected your mistakes, then you're ready for scaling. And I think it's very important for people to understand that scaling is not just another part of the process. Just like a parent has to determine that now my daughter or son is 14 or 15, and she's no more a child that I can treat as my child. Yes, she's your daughter, but you can't run it like a khap panchayat. You will do this, you will do that, etc., etc. So I think that's really the problem of scaling. And its absence of the mindset and the psychological approach to scaling, which becomes the Waterloo, both in big companies and small companies and startups and MSMEs. You're talking of having 30,000 startups in India. Do you know we have 6 million, I repeat, 6 million MSMEs.
Right.
I mean, India is, I would say, gifted. We are lucky to have so many small little enterprises. Right. We are like a beehive where there's activity going on. And that's to me, the reason why scaling up is considered to be a valley of death. But that's a bit negative, in my view. I agree with Naru, because that's like saying adolescence is a hell. It's not hell. It's a question of you having to change your mind and see how to raise your children.
Great, great. So I think both the points which both of you have made. One is as you grow up, the inability to know where exactly you have to focus on, and prioritizing on where you need to focus on becomes very important when you want to scale. And secondly, as you said, that during this time you have to be you're going to learn from your mistakes. So start small, fail fast, and then correct your mistakes, and then start scaling up. And I agree. When I joined TCS, we were only about 400 people, but now it's 450,000. But in that, there were many things that we learned along the way, and we corrected ourselves very quickly, and that helped us in being able to find the right way forward.
Because of the size of TCS today,
yeah,
$130 billion of market cap, people forget that TCS had an IPO only 15 years ago.
Yes.
Or 16 years ago, about the same time as Make My Trip.
Correct. Correct.
So in a sense, it's also a startup, except it's in the womb for more than 9 months.
Right.
So I think there are great lessons to be learned. I've written a book on TCS. That's why I know all these stories, though you have worked there and you know it better. Yeah.
So, so that leads to the next question, and I'll pose this to Mr. Naru. There is this huge thing for venture capital funding. The startups quickly wanting to go through Series A, Series B, and they are seeing when to exit. There is a lot of money, I guess, also floating around, not only from India but from overseas, for startups to be able to capitalize on. Is this good? Is this bad? What is your advice to startups? I mean, what should they focus on? Of course, every startup wants to at some point in time become investable so that they can scale up and address their full potential. But what should be the guidance to the startups at this point in time when they are in different stages of their growth?
So you must remember that I'm basically an optimist as an ex-entrepreneur myself. But I would just like to make a slight correction, if I may, to what you said. Okay. It's not as though there is just a lot of money floating around. I think in some careful and manner, and despite all the bureaucracy that several people, the government of India has been instrumental in cultivating environment where money has come in. And I think private sector has played a major role. Some results of that we've seen in the Reliance raising of $20 billion recently, but as far as the environment is concerned, I want to quickly touch on the evolution of the startup system in India. TDICI, and I already covered that, in 1998 it got started. At that point of time, entrepreneurship was still a bad word. People did not see you as a person who pays income tax or does honest work. You're the person who's responsible for the bribery and the corruption, etc. And everybody preferred a job in a multinational company if you could. It wasn't till 1996, 4 young guys started a company called Junglee. Anand Rajaram, Venki Hariharan, Rakesh Mathur, and Ashish Gupta. And that was for the first time Indians sat up and said, hey, 4 guys started up a company and they've been funded in several $1 million. Around that time, Hotmail burst onto the scene, and Sabir Bhatia made it possible for Indians to create great wealth. And then in 1999, SIBI acquired India World, and December of that year is when the Y2K ended. And suddenly, and I would say even as I talk, I can feel goose pimples. Suddenly, Indian entrepreneur, people working in the IT business and otherwise, and Indian entrepreneurs suddenly felt a wild feeling of surge of hope. And since 2000, in all fairness, the government has, in its own way, tried their very best to make it possible for entrepreneurs to flourish. And to some extent, we must also give credit to them rather than just keep criticizing them. So if I look at the evolution of the startup system, today we are at a maybe midpoint, at a halfway point. I see a lot of optimism, and I see the next 7 to 10 years being a brilliant time for entrepreneurs to get in over there and feel the thrill and chill of entrepreneurship.
Wonderful, wonderful. Indeed, I was just reminded of that saying in optimism. An optimist is a person who believes that this is the best of the world he lives in, and the pessimist fears it is true. So, so I hope all of us who are here on this call are optimists in the former sense and not in the latter sense. Gopalji, you have, there were three, you have written about the 3E model in the book: energy, education, and eudaimonia. In fact, I had not heard of the word eudaimonia until I read this book. And so it's a revelation to me. Can you just elaborate on this three? Because it was very interesting the way you brought that. Also, you brought the analogy of Ayurveda into that description. So can you please elaborate for the benefit of our audience?
So, eudaimonia is a Greek word. And a simple way to express eudaimonia, perhaps inaccurate from an academic's point of view, is a feeling of well-being. Okay, that's what eudaimonia means. And the first E and the second E are energy and education. By energy, I mean entrepreneurial energy. Somebody has to create wealth in a society. You can't treat all entrepreneurs as though they are crooks. There'll be some entrepreneurs who are crooks, but there are some government officers who are crooks, some police officers who are crooks, some politicians who are crooks, but that doesn't make all of them crooks.
Right.
So enterprise, and the tradition of the Baniyas in North India, the Chettiars in the South, the Bhatiyas in Gujarat, they've all shown what energy means. And the middle is education. If you create wealth and you create it in sufficient quantities, then you must use it to advance society. And I use the word education in a broad sense, not of primary and secondary education, of course we include that, but cultural advancement. And therefore, dance forms, Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, have all come because somebody with wealth decided to support those arts. I call all that education. What the Tanjavur guys did. What happened? There's a duplication happening. What the Tanjavur what's happening? Somebody is not muted.
Yeah, everybody else can mute. Then I will go ahead, sir.
The Tanjavur Marathas did for music and dance and so on and so forth. So you need a society to be progressive, to have a source of enterprise and wealth. You need education, cultural advancement, which will lead to eudaimonia, which will lead to peace and well-being. So this is the Ram Rajya that poets have described. Now, I wanted to bring this because the concept of enterprise and business, in which I include entrepreneurship, large companies, trading, has a very shady connotation in our social situation, because of the misdeeds of a few. I want entrepreneurs, SMEs, MSMEs, large companies to feel proud that because of them, society is advancing. And all that baggage of socialism that we have all inherited is not a good thing. And I think of late, the political leadership has also been saying the same thing in India, that you need enterprise. And if I look at the human body, it's exactly the same. Somebody must earn money by working as a mason on the road or building, or by being an engineer or being the chief executive of Niti Aayog. And that money must feed people and raise responsible children, and that can lead to a sense of well-being. Lots of our, unfortunately, a large proportion of the population of this country does not have the 3 E's. And I used it in that sense to, I hope in a small way, reassure entrepreneurs and MSMEs that they have a very cardinal role in the Indian economy. Despite all the bashing that they receive from some leftist oriented press, this country will progress only when entrepreneurship progresses, and they are the first E of the 3 E's.
Excellent, sir. Excellent. Thank you so much for that elaboration, as well as, the analogy, such a good analogy of how entrepreneurship is going to drive energy into the economy of a country, how education is going to empower them with the necessary tools and whatever you need to make this successful, and how ultimately the well-being of the country is what is being sought, and the well-being of the world for that matter, not just of the country. And that's going to result through this combination, and that's very beautifully brought out. I'd like to turn over to Naruji. Of those 9 stories, I go back to the 9 stories that you said. Can you give 3 or 4 distilled lessons that startups can learn from those stories? And I don't want you to elaborate on the stories, but just the distilled 3 or 4 lessons that you'd like to share with all the startups.
Yeah, I just must point out to you, unfortunately, for some reason, my speaker system is not working. So I'm using the phone speaker.
I can hear you.
Yeah, all right. So I heard your question. I would just like to point out that entrepreneurs have to get an idea, then they got to have the passion to see that idea through. And I think the examples of Bharat Matrimony and Naukri.com are classic examples where the existing system of classified advertising wasn't working as efficiently as what technology could do. If I look at several of those 9 companies, they created an idea and they pursued it, put their lives on the mat, so to speak, and pursued it with vigor and made it work. And I think if you, one of the first things that I would say to any entrepreneur is, if you have an idea, then you should be able to see it through in terms of articulating it, and you should be able to execute that properly. So if I look around at the 9 companies and at including the other 6 whom I did not get a chance to illustrate in the book, there is one thing common is that. The second thing is that they never got carried away with whatever success they got. They hung in there and made it what I call a phenomenal success. People like Bharat Matrimony have now gone global. They're taking marriage to across religions, across castes, and across geos. Now that, according to me, is a massive experiment which is bound to turn out successful if he continues to pursue it in the manner that he has. So the overriding theme of humility that I'm talking about, I think, is something that is very important. So other than this, Gopal, you want to add something?
No, I think his question was, what can we learn from those 9? I think you summarized it very well.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Mr. Gopal, let me ask you this question. Large companies bring tremendous ability. Small companies bring tremendous agility. Entrepreneurs bring. While the book is on wisdom for grown-ups, wisdom for startups from grown-ups, every large company also, the CEO thinks, can my company be more entrepreneurial and more agile than what they are as they grow up to a particular scale? So is there anything that one can learn also from the startup world for large corporate? Because this book is actually, when I go through it, it is meant, it is readable for both the startups and the grown-ups. And what lessons being in the corporate world, and looking at the agility of startup, are there something that grown-ups can learn from these startups, or is it only one way street?
I think it's an excellent question. You're perceptive. In fact, we debated it. And somewhere down the line in our debate, we said, let's keep the focus of the book. Otherwise, you'll end up writing a part one, part two, what each can learn from the other, and it'll go on and on. But your question is still a valid one. I do believe that grown-ups can also learn from startups. No question about it. Just like my father could learn from me when I was growing up,
Right.
and I'm learning from my son. No different. Now, in order to be brief in the response I'm giving you, I'm keeping it to the point about agility.
Right.
Right? Just agility in quick decision making, agility in responding to uncertainty, etc. And here again, like I tend to do, by now you're familiar, I tend to take metaphors because that makes the point without becoming pedantic,
Right.
You look at an octopus. An octopus has 8 arms. And those 8 arms are slashing all over the place in some apparently coordinated algorithm, which the head of the octopus, which is sitting in the center, must be generating. And it is very agile. So the octopus decides that arm number 3 and arm number 7, just to take a number, will go towards that object to grab it, pinch it, and pull it together. And put it into its mouth. Whereas arm number 1 and 2 are fighting some predator. We are finding our Hindu gods have many arms, but we human beings have only 2 arms. And we think it's a great brain process. Now, if you look at the difference between an octopus and say our body or any mammal, it's very interesting. The octopus's arms are made of pure muscle. There is no bone.
Right.
Whereas our body is made of bone and muscle. And as we grow older, the bone gets weaker, the muscle also gets weaker, and the flesh gets bigger. And that makes us lack of agility. That's why a person at 70 is not as agile as his son of 20. So the message for me is, how can large companies decalcify themselves of the bone? How can they keep the muscle trim, and by doing light weights, they don't have to become big bodybuilders, so that the body can be juvenile or more juvenile than it otherwise would be. At 70, you can't become like Yayati in Mahabharata, try to become a young man. But at 70, you can have a body which is 60 or 55, you can try. Even if you're not Mr. Iyengar of Pune practicing yoga at the age of 100. So it is decalcify the bone, do exercises for the muscle, and keep your body agile. And large companies tend to do this by having consultants come and tell them how to delayer and how to read an organization chart. But I think if you use the metaphor of what the hell is a bone doing, a bone, for example, is supposed to protect you if you have a fall. An octopus doesn't have a fall on the road, whereas a human body does, whether it's a bison or a human being. So you have to get that balance right between bone density, muscular strength, and flesh. And I think there's a lot that you can learn from the very agile. Young startups are like octopuses, pure muscle.
I love the example you gave about Zorba the Greek in your book.
Yes.
Where he says that, to a very successful boss of a large enterprise, you have got everything, boss, except one thing: madness. A man needs a little madness, or he never cuts the rope and gets free. So, and then he also went on to quote another thing that Ravi has mentioned this to you, I think. He says entrepreneurs should aim for leadership in the market and trusteeship in society. Can you just share a little more on this particular thought?
The small point I would like to make is sometimes MSMEs and entrepreneurs, startup people, I include all of them, MSMEs, SMEs, and startups. They tend to think that this responsibility to the community, paying taxes, having a higher ethical purpose can all come later. Right now, I'm very focused on just getting my cash flows organized. That's like saying I'm so focused on changing the nappies of my baby and getting her to school on time that values and morality can come later when she's 15. It will never come.
Hmm.
A mother is the best example of an entrepreneur. All mothers, doff your hats to them,
Hmm.
are raising their baby, going through all the pain of maternity and changing their nappies and doing all that stuff, here and now short-term actions, but she never stops dreaming whether her daughter or son will be a professor or an IAS or an army or whatever. And I think if entrepreneurs can emulate their sisters and their mothers in balancing short-term and long-term, trusteeship to society and profitability of their company, India will be vastly richer.
Hmm.
It's not a privilege that only for Tatas and the Unilevers and the Bajaj and the Godreges. It's a privilege for every citizen of this country.
Excellent, excellent. Naruji, before I turn to a few questions from the audience, I've heard of this saying, top line is vanity, bottom line is sanity, cash flow is reality. But in a startup's world, often cash flows are not a reality. What is your advice? I mean, does this adage work for them, or do they have to think differently? What are your experiences and what is your suggestion on this?
Well, as I've stated in the book, and I'll repeat it right now, it's cash flow is so critical in India, at least. I can't talk about other countries.
Right.
In India, that any startup founder needs to spend at least 6 to 7 hours a week, which means an hour a day, on his cash flows. And he has got to be on top of it. If he's going to build an organization, then he should know where the money is going, because a tactical decision every day as to which is paid first. And taking a leap of what Gopal said earlier, the non-payment of provident fund or non-compliance begins at a very small level, where to keep the factory going, you need to pay the suppliers, and your choice is either pay the supplier or pay the provident fund, and you do the first instance of postponement. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to also say one of the biggest frustrations for a startup founder is always going to be that he might start off from a technology angle, but 50 to 60% of his time is going to go on fundraising and allocation of money for cash flow purposes. So that's certainly a lesson to be taken from this.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for clarifying on that, Naruji. I'm going to turn over to some questions which we have received from the audience. One question, Gopalji, for you is the role of mentors in the growth of startups, particularly mentors from corporate organizations who can mentor young startups and so on and so forth. What is the role and how valuable are they? And I think Ashutosh Ji also referred to in his talk earlier, but your thoughts on it?
Well, I will be stating a truism if I say mentorship is essential. Just like a child requires a teacher and a mentor, even during our careers in large companies, you need mentors. And that is stating a truism. I'm very delighted to be associated with Atal Innovation Mission, where I see the work is being done by you and all your wonderful colleagues. We have the privilege of sitting around the mission high-level committee and giving you our point of view, but you have focused so much on mentorship. And I think there are other institutions like angel investors, TIE, many others, I won't go into listing all of them, who are doing a tremendous job, imperfect by the way, but everything in life is imperfect, but doing a tremendous job of mentorship.
Right.
The schemes of DBT, DST are also focused very much on mentors. So I think an entrepreneur who thinks he doesn't need a mentor, he or she doesn't need a mentor, might have got the wrong mentor, in which case you can do something about it.
Right.
But for God's sake, be sure that you have somebody who can provide a mirror to some of your wild thoughts. It's like I say always that a wife has a great influence, positive influence on her husband who has flights of fancy in the way he thinks of life and career. And in the same way, a mentor has a great influence on an entrepreneur.
Absolutely, sir. And you have been a great guide to us in Atal Innovation Mission as a mentor. And I really attribute a whole lot of stuff that we have done on the mentorship front to the guidance that we received from you, Tarunji, and many others in the MHLC. And I personally believe that this is going to make a huge difference to all the budding innovators out there, because they need that sort of help and guidance and someone to speak to. Not some authority to whom they have to report, but somebody whom they can bounce off their ideas and so on. A question for Naruji is the compliance maze for startups. We don't have enough money to meet all the compliance needs that are there out there. Of course, the government of India, as I can see it from this point of view, is trying to do a lot to help ease that maze or lessen the maze. But what is your response to this question from one of the audience?
So the question of not having enough time doesn't arise. I would say if you sleep less and attend to it. The question of non-compliance comes up only when the going gets tough.
Right.
When the going gets tough, you have to make choices. As an entrepreneur, I myself have made the same kind of errors that I'm advising entrepreneurs not to do, which is putting compliance on the back seat. At times, there is no choice, but you need to check your position on the compliance on a weekly basis thereafter. This is something that I did right from the beginning. And suddenly you realize within a matter of 2 to 3 weeks, you realize that you're headed for a massive problem over here unless you find a way. And then you'll start looking at new ways, and miraculously, you manage to raise some additional funds and tide over that problem. Otherwise, the day is going to come when the compliance becomes the biggest of all your problems.
Right. So, excellent. I think one should always ensure compliance, but of course, the government and regulatory policy should constantly seek feedback and the voice of the beneficiaries to see how they can create ease of business and support them in their compliance maze. But there is no excuse for not being compliant. Otherwise, you will not be doing the right thing. Mr. Gopal Krishnan, there is one question from one of our audience saying, playing safe in management theory, playing safe is considered the riskiest thing. When do entrepreneurs play safe and when do they not?
So, playing safe doesn't mean don't take risks, but taking risk mitigated initiatives. Even in management theory, you have a risk matrix where you put down the risk and the probability of a particular risk occurring. For example, you can say, oh, there's a risk of a terrorist attack on my factory. But if I'm making, I don't know, cotton wool, the chances of somebody targeting my factory can be considered low. But if I'm making defense equipment, it can be considered high. So you make a risk matrix, probability of occurrence, and the impact if it does occur. And standard, every large company will have a risk matrix. Now, whether a startup or a medium company, if you take risk mitigated initiatives, in other words, you think about the what if in advance, then take risks. So when you use the word play safe, I use the word to mean take risk mitigated initiatives. Don't take, now if you see, look at the corporate sector and the huge number of NPAs. I'll keep it to the large companies because I come from that species. Many of them have borrowed and taken debt at a level which the equity just cannot support. So you created a center of gravity which is so high that a slight breeze and it will topple. And when it topples, you say, well, it's all bad luck, it is because of COVID, it is because of something else. That's what I mean. Tatas have also taken big risks. People think of Tatas as not being taking risk. To go and buy companies abroad for $13 billion, $5 billion, TCS has bought companies, BPO companies. They're all risks, but you have some treasure chest somewhere, and you know where that treasure chest is, to say that if push comes to shove, I can pay for these.
Correct.
Now, we didn't succeed. Tatas didn't succeed in telecom. That's an open book. But by God, they paid every single dollar or
Correct.
rupee to the banks.
Correct.
But when you take risks when you can't, when the push comes to shove, pay for it, then you're taking risks which are beyond your pale. And it is that kind of risk that one advocates against. If you don't think of mitigation, don't take risk. So think of a parachute diver or think of a rock climber. You better go with hooks and clasps so that you don't just climb and fall off from the 10th floor. Yeah.
Excellent, sir. Excellent. I think that is very important. Have a risk, take risk, but have a risk mitigation plan and ensure that you are taking calculated risks and not just jumping off, in a rush of impulsive decisions or reactions to some particular situation. So I know we are running out of time. There are many questions, sir, but we'll probably post them on to you online sometime. Or offline to you so that we can revert back. I would like you to talk on one particular thing. The startup world or the entrepreneur's world, let me put it that way, whether you're an MSME or whether you're a growing company or whether you're a small startup, takes a lot out of the person. They have to think about it day in, day out, and so on and so forth. And somewhere along, you start compromising on your quality of life, if you will. And you must have seen during your course of your corporate career, as well as in the course of Naru's startup interactions, you would have seen a lot of this. How important are two things? Number one, the ability to have a sense of humor. And I know every conversation with you is studied with humor, sir. Even in the most serious of situations, you are able to bring a very strong point with a sense of humor and make us laugh about it. More importantly, how important is it to be able to laugh at yourself for some of the mistakes that have happened? Because, take it seriously and you can go to the extreme. So I would like your thoughts on that before we wind up the topic.
I'd just like to take a first dive on that, if I may.
Sure.
In a very simple manner, Gopal and I are 1 year apart. And much as it may seem otherwise, Gopal is the older one and I am the younger one. But I look 3 years older than him, and that's the price I pay for being an entrepreneur. Now I'll pass it on to Gopal to answer.
Listen, people who think that the entrepreneur's life is particularly risky and enervating should know that there are other people who are also taking risky and enervating careers. Those who take their task seriously, you may join the Indian Police Service, you may join the Indian Administrative Service, you may join as a management trainee in a large company. Those who take their job seriously are pushing their body and their mind to the extreme. Including, by the way, a tennis player who wants to go and win Wimbledon, You're pushing your mind and body. If you think Virat Kohli has a relaxed breakfast with a double egg omelette, you're mistaken, right? So I don't think it's fair to assume that all entrepreneurs are having a very tough and enervating life. Many entrepreneurs are. They think of their business 24/7, but they are no different from the guys who started other careers who are also pushing themselves. Anybody who pushes himself to the extreme has to assess his body or his mind's capacity for that stress. And that will vary from person to person based on genetics and epigenetics. But very important, he must be able not to take himself too seriously. Now, whether you call it a sense of humor or something else, or a nice, happy married family, or whatever you want to call it, friends, mentors, all of them contribute. But the greatest danger for a top-class corporate executive, a hugely ambitious entrepreneur, a very solid public servant in all those services that we talked about, a sportsman, is not to take themselves too seriously. When they take themselves too seriously, they lose humility and humor. And that is what kills them. And I can say this, I have not been a very good practitioner of this, but now at my age, I can say that I wish I had learned it earlier. I would like other people to know, don't take yourself too seriously. The world will still run after you're gone. The world's graveyards are full of people who thought they were too important for the world to continue without them. But the graveyards are not visited by anybody, and we will all be there one day.
Great, great, sir. Have a sense of humility, have a sense of humor. That is very important, irrespective of what you're pursuing in life. And I think that's a great message to all the budding entrepreneurs out there. Sir, I want both of you to share your final message to the entrepreneurial world. We are in India, like I said, you know, with 1.3 billion people and with a demographic dividend, there is an opportunity for entrepreneurs and startups to create a huge difference to our nation and to the world. So anything that I may have not touched upon, but which you could maybe share a few closing remarks on this subject.
So I will just take one last bit of advice, or take it otherwise. If you want to be an entrepreneur, and if you want to run the long distance, you have to be physically fit. So 45 years ago, I started running, and I'm still running. And I think it's a very important message that I pass on, that I know that Gopal has been playing sports non-stop for the last 45 years, maybe more. So I think it's something that we take with a pinch of salt, but you got to take that very, very seriously, because you will be put through such unrelenting pressure that unless you're physically fit, you won't be able to cope with it.
Excellent, excellent. Mr. Gopal?
Well, the only, I think I touched upon it, but in case I haven't, since you asked the question, the only point I would make is, you know, people who accomplish a lot are people with a high self-esteem. And it's possible to combine self-esteem with humility. It's not impossible to combine them. Self-esteem people are not always arrogant or proud. And I suppose it's in the context of entrepreneurship, I must quote the greatest baniya this world has seen, Mahatma Gandhi, who combined self-esteem with humility.
Correct.
And I do believe, I would like to see an India, and we are at a very early stage of the career, so I think in the startup and MSME journey, in the next 50 years, the importance of SMEs and startups, and which would have become grown-ups by that time, is going to be enormous. And I would like people to feel that they are in national service. No different from joining the army or the Air Force or the Navy or the IAS or the IPS or anything else. And if you have that self-esteem, I think it will do a lot of good. So self-esteem and health and humility is a good avial. You know what's an avial? For those who don't know, it's a mixture of vegetables that we consume in the South. It's a good avial to keep: self-esteem, humility, and health.
Wonderful, wonderful message to end on, sir. Self-esteem, humility, and health. All three are very, very important in the life of anybody. Forget, it's not necessarily just a startup or an entrepreneur, in the life of anybody. And that, I think, is a very valuable lesson that we should all learn from and implement. With that, it has been a delight, sir, for me to have, and it's a great privilege for me to have had an opportunity to converse with you on this very, very important topic, which is so important to everybody who is listening and to our country. And thank you so much for this wonderful book. I am sure that everyone who reads it will learn a lot more and glean a lot more in addition to this conversation that we have had. And I personally am so very thankful for this opportunity to have spent some time with you reflecting on the same. With that, I pass it over to Suresh ji for his question.
May I just say on behalf of Naru and myself, a quick word of thanks. Ramanan, you brought out everything that we had to say, but well done in your interviewing style. And to ISBA, SIGN, DST, the ministry for supporting this event. I hope we have given a positive message to all the people, and we are grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
So one final question from my side. Advice to grown-ups who ought to be startups.
become young again. It's called neoteny. You know, are you not a biologist, Dr. Gupta?
No, I am from the engineering side.
Okay, but you ask anybody in DBT, they'll tell you what is neoteny. Neoteny. Neoteny is the art of juvenilization. How can growing organisms keep looking young? And the octopus example is one such example. All of us should practice neoteny.
Thank you for all wonderful words of wisdom. I think we need to really collate and circulate around. So
Yes.
thank
We'll
you.
do that. Suresh ji, you're on mute.
Good evening, one and all. So it gives me immense pleasure to propose a vote of thanks. So after listening to 2 hours of analogies and the examples given, I'm tempted to take an example from movie industry. It has been a 1.5 hours non-stop blockbuster with the 2 superheroes and a brilliant director and a powerful producer, DST. So thank you, Mr. Gopal Krishnan and Mr. Naru for articulating the thoughts so well, seamlessly switching between science, philosophy, and management. I think we have enough food for our thought for several weeks to follow. And thank you for being with us this evening. And thank you, Mr. Ramanan, for wonderfully choreographing this dance to players. And so thank you for being with us. And thanks to Dr. Anita Gupta and Professor Ashutosh Sharma for giving that inaugural address. And thanks for the continued support from DST, Professor Dr. Gupta. And I should also thank and compliment Ms. Poini and Ms. Ganga from SIGN for scripting this, authoring this event, and CIE for giving us all of the platform. So I'm sure the participants have gained immensely out of this, and we are again tempted to buy this book in the coming days and going through so that we can recollect some of the finer points. So thanks to all the participants. So it's overwhelming response. I'm sure even the Facebook and YouTube channels are being watched, and we will have a repository in our ISBAS channel. So thank you all, and good evening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much indeed. Bye.
Thank you, sir.